borders will be closed indefinitely. The vast majority we're incorporating, we don't need. They're fighting age and they're here to spread the caliphate.
So does that mean that you'd ban the Islamic call to prayer?
Of course.
How do you think that would be received?
I don't care.
I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health.
Nick.
Liam.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. It's funny, I've got big opinions on particular subjects, and I'm probably a lot less political than people think. I was one of the 40% that didn't vote because I didn't really know which way to turn, but I did know that I didn't want Labour in the hot seat, and sadly that's where we are now. You've come onto my radar because of your, well, in your words, radical manifesto, and you're the leader of the UKIP party, which Nigel Farage used to lead years ago. So, yeah, bit of your backstory, then we're going to your manifesto and your policies and the state of the country, because I think we can all agree that the country it's in shit shape, and it's sad. I would go as far as to say it's sad, borderline depressing at the moment with what's going on and the identity that we've lost. So before you got into politics, let's get a feel for who you are as a man outside of UKIP. Give me a little bit about your background, and it can be as raw as you like. Just roll with it. Where you from?
So I'm from a town called Eastbourne, next door to Brighton, down on the south coast. I had a very privileged upbringing from a very wealthy family. I was privately educated. The crash of the early 90s wiped my family out, and life changed dramatically for me thereafter. But normal guy, I was a childhood actor. That was my path. And then I decided that politics, religion and athletics were subjects that were most intriguing to me. So that became my where I learned, where I applied myself, and where ultimately a lot of things came to fruition business-wise and in terms of political aspirations also. About 6 years ago, in 2019, I saw what was coming our way with regards to Wuhan. And I saw what the government were lining themselves up to do. I saw it a mile off. I was told to walk a certain way in Tesco's. I was told to stand a certain distance to my fellow citizen. I was told to wear a mask. I was told to clap at the sky. I was told to be silent. And I was observing how the vast majority of my network, family, friends, etc., were law-abiding in that context, lemmings. And I've never been one to shy away from a challenge or speak the truth. There are some people that just have this burning desire for justice and for truth as well. By 2021, I was Chief Operations Officer of Turning Point through fact-finding and through learning and cultivating relationships.
What is Turning Point?
Turning Point UK is the leading and frankly only conservative activist organisation in the UK, initially conceived, born out of Turning Point USA, which is very famous, to counter the woke far-left ideology on our university campuses, indoctrinating our university students to communism and away from Christianity. It's not just indoctrinating to communism, but by definition, away from Christianity. That's a very important point. And then 3 years later, I find myself as leader of a national party. So I suppose in 120 seconds, that's a small overview of me.
You're very much in support of the working class and the forgotten people. What happened in your background that made you relatable and compassionate towards the working class? Is there anything you can remember that made you think these are the people that need some kind of support and structure?
My father was a business owner, and the trade that he was in meant that as a family, culturally, we associated with normal, hardworking, regular people. Now, back then, it's hard to imagine now, but back then you had what what typically patriots refer to as pub culture, but actually pub culture. So we're going back to the 90s now. And I was around tradesmen, good, hardworking men. But the reality is that there was no defining moment which made me think, oh, the working class is better or more worthy than any other class. It doesn't work like that. It was only when I started to realise after Blair's government, because obviously this, in terms of the enemies we face and what we're going to go on to talk about today, this has been going on for decades. But more recently, in the last, I'd say, 10 years, with regards to silencing and with regards to cancelling and with regards to, for example, with regards to Tommy Robinson as well, the overall agenda is multifaceted from the establishment, but it is to silence, to smear and to censor the working class, because the working class has the ability to revolt. I'm not saying that it can't happen in other areas, but it's the working class that build our roads, build our schools, build the churches. It's the working class that make things happen and do in Britain. So we owe them a debt, but the establishment, for their snobbery, they despise the working class. And again, that can be broken down. I don't think it's overly relevant. They just do. And I favour those people who work really hard for a living and who come from humble upbringings and backgrounds. So it's not a particular preference in any one direction. It's just an acknowledgement of how important it is in Britain, how important industry is, and how important it is to build things and to get on with the job. And also the fact that the establishment despises and wants to silence the working class. The working class have been the most hit by mass uncontrolled immigration. The working class have been the most hit by the rape, genocide and the grooming of our white British girls, as we found out from the Pakistani grooming gangs. That was their preference. The working class have been the most hit by unprecedented levels of taxation. The working class have been the most betrayed, the most run over. And those people that have profiteered off the working class have pulled the ladder up after they've climbed the echelons. So there's all sorts of betrayal across society. But there was no one moment where I thought, oh, I need to stand up for the working class. These people have been so betrayed that they've given up hope. They've given up faith. A vast majority have given up hope and faith. And we owe it to them, no one individual in particular, but as a class, we owe it to them to say, do you know what? Actually, there is a political party, there is an entity here that hears you, and we want to right the wrongs of the past.
I'm glad you mentioned political snobbery, because that is, for me, a real bone of contention. And before we get into your bones of contention, one last question, because I've got a feeling that you're gonna rise to fame for a lot of reasons. Are there any skeletons that could come out of the closet? Are there any things in the past that could potentially come out and be used against you from, say, the mainstream legacy left-wing media? Did you ever get in any trouble?
So mainstream media, certainly, and also, let's not forget, my enemies. So the far-left totalitarian propaganda is about framing you, smearing you. It's about defaming you. So the far left have absolutely no honour whatsoever. They do what they do in terms of destabilisation, defaming, demonetising, slandering. They will do anything. So there's nothing that I know about which is problematic for voters, if I'm hearing you right, or within UKIP. So it kind of depends what your question is.
I suppose anything, doing a short jousting for a fight you had in a pub, or trouble here and there, or associating with the wrong crowd, just anything really that you can think, I could see somebody using that against me. And I could rattle off 100 things that people could use against me. Because I know that no one's perfect. And I think people relate to people that don't pretend to be perfect as well.
I think I hear what you're saying. There was an incident one evening, this is a very long time ago. What I recall, my friend, he was getting battered quite badly. But again, at that hour, after a few drinks, I honestly don't remember.
You blacked out?
It's not something I probably remember at the time either, because you go into fight or flight. Anyway, I perceived a threat. I acted in self-defense, and then there was an arrest and there was a charge as well. And my debt to society is paid. I didn't go to prison. My debt to society is paid, and we were stung so very badly by the judge no one was hurt. There was no injury report.
That's what I wanted to know, just so the audience know that you're one of them. You're not establishment.
No, I have no doubt we're going to delve into me and UKIP, and I've got some very important messages for the British public. But so we're immaculately clear, I'm an ordinary guy.
So what are your main bones of contention within the UK?
Islamism, communism, liberalism, materialistic atheism, apathy, indifference, and potholes.
There's a few pothole enthusiasts on X I've noticed recently. And what's your number one bone of contention out of that list?
Liberalism. Liberalism breeds apathy. Liberalism breeds indifference. Liberalism breeds degeneracy. Liberalism breeds fear. Fear is omnipresent. You either control fear or fear will control you. Liberal gluttony is a coma that we've been in for far too many decades, and slowly but surely we are, as a collective, we are waking up out of it, and we're not liking what we see when we take a look around our communities. Everyone who is inherently socially conservative will drift to the right, to where those who are blue-blooded actual social conservatives have stayed their entire life, and the hand remains extended to those people who realise that liberalism is a failed ideology.
And can you summarise the liberal ideology?
Probably not, no. So it depends. There's an awful lot of academics that you'll hear terms like neoliberalism, economic libertarianism. You'll hear all these different words. The model, ideology-wise, and the mindset of the proponents was that of the individual liberty trumps that of the collective. Now, I'm not saying that's a definition, by the way. That's a completely different.
Yeah.
But to answer the question, and for ease,
what problems would you say have liberals fed the UK?
So we have to distinguish between the mindset of the liberal, which is I'm all right, Jack. I'm okay. I'm looking, but I'm not registering. I'm okay. I'm pulling the ladder up behind me. In terms of the establishment, it basically means anything goes. It basically means the individual liberty trumps that of societal cohesion and social fabric. So it's very important to understand the liberal mindset, which varies from person to person, but I've given a small overview there. And I've also given an example of what it means at state level. If I give you one more example, a very well-known media commentator has put up the other day, in reference to two girls who are behaving absolutely disgracefully in the UK at the moment, he's put up a comment saying, I'm a libertarian, so I suppose I'm okay with this behaviour, but what about societal consequences? Pick a side. You cannot have it both ways.
Are we talking about Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips here?
We are.
What's your take on their behaviour?
They need to be arrested and sectioned for their own sake and for the sake of the British public. At the exact same time that we have once again a huge media spike in the notoriety of the most heinous of crimes committed predominantly by Pakistani grooming gangs against specifically white native girls. At the same time, we've got two white girls making sure that their media appearances, pictures, filming is with multiple men abusing them who are of foreign descent. Is that a coincidence? I haven't made my mind up yet. But in terms of the actual behaviour, we've seen just recently in Turkey, a woman has copied, is a copycat. So she said she's going to sleep with 1,000 men in a day or something ridiculous. By the way, none of these numbers add up. I think they're lying. And also it's completely problematic in terms of the language they're using because you have to divide 24 hours up, etc., etc. So this woman in Turkey's tried the same thing and she's been arrested and detained. So I'm not drawing parallels with that because we're not Turkey. But the reality is that the liberal mindset will be anything goes until it comes to my door or my community or my home. At some point, we're going to have to pick a side. Are we putting societal cohesion and what's in the best interest of the nation and our families? Are we putting that first? Or are we going to say such and such is allowed to behave like this? It doesn't matter how many copycats there are. It doesn't matter how many young people get influenced and brainwashed. It doesn't matter. We'll just let it go because of individual liberty. I think it's an absolute disgrace. I think our father is a disgrace. I think our mother is a disgrace. It is absolutely abhorrent that we are seeing at the same time the grooming gang scandal resurface. These girls think it's appropriate to behave like that. Even if you were doing that in your basement and you were keeping it quiet, why are you doing that at this particular time? It's so, and this is something that, again, I hope to bring dimensions to these conversations which aren't brought up before. It's not just abhorrent and degenerate and disgusting how they're behaving, but look at the timing of it as well.
Yeah, see, I've never thought of it from that angle, but I'll put my 2 pence worth in, because I've interviewed Bonnie Blue and I wanted to speak to her to find out in the politest possible way what the fuck she was playing at. I wanted to know what inspired her, what damage is behind the eyes, what trauma has she experienced, what she's setting out to achieve, and has she really thought this through? What example are you setting to young women? And also, how do you think that's going to affect your mind and your soul as you advance through life? And so I interviewed Bonnie Blue and I politely let her know that I didn't agree with her, in the hope that people saw that interview and put their 2 pence worth in the comments, and then maybe she would read the comments and think, maybe this isn't the best thing I'm doing with my life. And then moving on to Lily Phillips, after she saw that interview, she applied to come on the podcast as well via email. And we said, well, you're more than welcome to come on, but be prepared to be challenged, because I was then going to ramp it up a gear, because she was planning on sleeping with 1,000 men in 24 hours. First and foremost, any young ladies watching this, for goodness sake, it's just not the way forward. It's horrendous behaviour and it's bad across the board. And there's so many other ways you can make money. Even if you want to do it within the sex industry, you don't need to be handing yourself like a bit of meat on a slab to all and sundry. But what I was trying to do was get Lily Phillips here before she ventured into that outrageous attempt of breaking the world record and sleeping with 1,000 men. She didn't know this, but I was going to try and talk her out of it. But I think the moment's passed now, and the chances are, never say never, but as it stands, it's probably not necessary to have her on. I think a lot of people have seen what's going on there. And I think these discussions need to be had, because if you just pretend they're not happening, they're going to get attention elsewhere. There's no two ways about that. If anything, she platformed me. But it needs to be spoke about so that people don't think it's the norm. If it goes unchallenged, it becomes normal. And we need to make it clear that no one wants our future generations of ladies behaving like that and destroying themselves. Just thought I'd put that in there.
Yeah, it needs to be condemned.
Yes.
It's this turn the other cheek, individual libertarianism, sit on the fence, stand for everything, stand for nothing. Absolute nonsense. Forgiveness is only for those who feel shame. So Christians have, unfortunately, since the Reformation, they've bastardized. We talk about being a Christian country, right? So let's talk about that. 26 million Protestants, 4 million Catholics. Christianity has been bastardized to just turn the other cheek and just love the sinner. Forgiveness is only for those who feel shame. These girls don't feel shame. Their parents, their families are complicit. Candace Owens platformed one of them. I think it was Lily.
Right.
I think so. And I think Candace, if memory serves, made it very clear that she's been traumatized, that she's mentally ill, and this is all to do with her mother and father. And then that society blames the men queuing up for it. Let's condemn the evil. Let's condemn the sin. Let's go to source on this. Exactly the same as I would do policy-wise when I advocate what I advocate for the punishment of males committing pedophilia or whatever. It's not about one particular gender. To your point, let's start condemning the evil. Let's start shaming the evil. There's a reason why the far left agenda has worked its way into our institutions, why it's worked its way into our government, why it's worked its way into our facilities, our processes, our policies. There's a reason why we've been tolerant of evil for too long. So we're going to go after the establishment and have some very frank conversations about that, but we have been tolerant of evil for too long.
And my final word on that subject is, for anyone listening, if you're one of those 1,000 men that are partaking in marathon sex sessions within a group, sort your head out. You know, just to be blunt, you're a fucking degenerate. You don't want to be remembered as one of the 1,000 men that slept with a young woman. Like, man up, fix up, and do something more constructive and positive with your life. Don't play a part in that degeneracy, because they'll also look back, I believe, one day and think, what was I doing? Why did I do that? When they read in the newspaper that one of them girls has done something terrible to themselves, which I believe will be the outcome eventually, they will end up in rehab somewhere, or there'll be some serious psychological issues that they're dealing with. These men don't want to... Well, they do at the moment because they're short-sighted and they're thinking with their dicks. It's like, think with your head and think with your heart, and go and find a nice girlfriend. And on that note, tell me what separates Nick Tenconi and UKIP from the other political parties.
Well, I'd say that the first response is me. It's unheard of what the position that I'm in for an ordinary guy to be leader of a national party. It's absolutely unheard of. The positions of national leaders of national parties are reserved typically for the upper echelons. So we've got this. It's a massive step forward for Britain, and it's a huge opportunity for voters as well. So that's the first thing. Second thing would have to be transparency. And what we mean by that is when we're not playing any games, long or otherwise. We're going to say what the British public want to hear, and we're going to do what the British public want to see. That's what we mean when we say transparency. A third, obviously, would be our 6 missions, which are available on the website and very clear as well on our social media space. The fourth, I would say, would be our policies in our manifesto, which I'm sure we're going to come on to talk more about. I would also say that there is a space which hasn't been addressed for a very long time, potentially by any other political parties, and that is the recognition of our faith and the fact that it needs to be reinstated and restored within the heart of government. So politicians and political parties for decades have avoided Christianity. They've referenced it, they've name-dropped, there might have been a few speeches about it, but they've essentially embraced secularism and liberalism. You can't do both. There's a very good reason why we're doing this, because we believe we've worked out the algorithm, we've cracked the code on what needs to be done differently. When people say, what's the difference between you and the establishment? You'll be the same. Well, no, because we're going to put Christianity back into the heart of government. Now, obviously, I can explain, I'm sure you're going to ask me, I can explain more and more about that, and we have it written to go on the website so people know where they stand on this very important point.
So before we go on to your 6 missions of your manifesto, do you feel like the underdog in the race?
Absolutely. And I feel that, but I think it's very important that people view that as well. This is a Cinderella story. This is the underdog in the fight. And people love that story. But that is very much what this is. This is full-time for me. So I've been a full-time activist for the last 4 years. I intend on staying as an activist. A lot of people will say such and such is a politician, such and such is a campaigner, and such is an activist. It's just nonsense rhetoric. You're all of those things, and a leader, and a human being, and potentially a husband and a father as well. All those different things. The British public deserves to see something better and more than what they've had for so many decades. So you're going to see an awful lot of activism. You're going to hear an awful lot of speeches, I mean, outside of our missions and our manifesto.
And do you think being the underdog drives you more or less?
More. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a couple of parallels, again, I'll draw. So you've got the hungry wolf at the bottom of the hill that won't stop. That in order to stop me, you're going to have to kill me. And at the top, well-fed, the lion, well-fed, or the wolf that's well-fed and has everything it wants. You become complacent, you become bored, you become worn down, there's a reason why my life has mapped out the way that it has done up until this point. 20 years ago, a degree in politics and international relations and philosophy. Then I went into corporate sales and became essentially someone who was always involved in business development. Over 20 years later, I find myself in the heart of the culture war on the front line. Everything has pointed to this moment in terms of my strength, my health, my age, etc. Massively the underdog. And I'm asking the British public to get behind that entity, that party, and give us a chance at returning justice to the British people.
Let's move on to your 6 missions, and I'll be interested to know what people watching this on YouTube or listening to it, whether they think your missions are radical or not. And this is the first time I'm going to hear your missions as well. So if you can, hit me with your 6 missions that are in your manifesto.
Yeah, so the first one is mass deportation. So we call it detention, deportation, remigration. So that is a suspected 3 to 5 million illegal invaders, a mixture of illegal and legal people on our land who we would detain and deport. Remigration is a separate area, which is a fairly new term in Britain and in political rhetoric at the moment. But essentially what it means, it's the opposite of migration. So you send them home. That's the first thing.
And who's them?
So anything to do with deportations is to do with illegal immigrants, foreign nationals in our jails. Remigration, once everyone's got their head around what that means, the British Charter we've produced suggests if you are here with a toxic agenda towards Britain, if you are here to push the caliphate, if you are here to push sectarian ideas that are hostile to Britain and to Christianity, if you can't speak English, if you are here to colonize, if you are a weaponized colonizer, there's a big list of these things. We'll look at those areas. And this is predicated on the fact that as a journalist, I've also had to go into these areas and fact find for myself. So I've seen it up close and personal. These areas typically are referred to as no-go zones. And this is a phrase known across Europe.
Do they exist?
They exist. So these have been uncovered. I wasn't the first. Many good people have done far better work than me. But we know those zones exist and they're hostile to Britain's core values. And everyone's going to have to make their peace with the fact that I haven't been proven wrong when I say culture and faith are one and the same thing. To this day, no one's changed my mind that culture and faith are one and the same thing. So when we say remigration and we're talking about sectarian dominance, here to spread the caliphate, can't speak English, and have claimed Britain as their own in their own communities, their own values, norms, way of life, etc.
Do you know where these specific no-go zones are?
From the documentary that I made, Alum Rock in Birmingham is indescribable. Whitechapel and Bethnal Green in London, again, indescribable. Certainly Oldham, parts of Oldham, Rotherham, Rochdale and Bradford, again, indescribable. Now, I chose 5-6 locations, but there are many others, and we mustn't ignore the anecdotal reports of those good people that have essentially exposed and uncovered those types of areas. But in terms of your point with regards to relatability to Joe Public that isn't aware of this, in the age of digital media and the rise of independent journalism, and you guys are the new media, there's no excuses anymore. They're choosing not to, if they don't watch the documentaries, if they don't do the fact finding, they're choosing not to do that. They don't want to see it. They don't want to believe. It's a bizarre form of narcissistic personality disorder with Stockholm syndrome, with cognitive dissonance. That's just the way it is, because we know there's no excuses anymore. Pandora's box is open. It's all available. It's all out there. But yes, I have seen these areas and they are indescribable. And if you are not one of them, you do stick out like a sore thumb. It is incredibly intimidating and you're likely to be tracked. I'm not saying you'll be attacked. I'm not saying that at all. But you will be tracked. You will be assessed when you enter into that area.
I grew up in Crawley, that's multicultural. It's a London overspill. And I got a lot of friends that migrated to the UK years ago. Would they be safe under a UKIP government from remigration?
These people that you're referring to, your friends, are they British citizens?
Yes.
Are they here to spread the caliphate?
No.
Are they law-abiding?
Yes.
Can they speak English?
Yes.
Then they have nothing to worry about.
Some better than me. So you're talking about foreign criminals that don't toe the line, you're not welcome, and you'd send them back to where they were initially from.
It's far more brutal than that. So you mentioned foreign criminals. So if you're a foreigner, I prefer to use the term on a visa. That's what we mean, is it not?
Yeah.
Sure, if you're a foreigner, that means you're on some sort of visa. If you're on a visa and you commit a crime, you'll be deported. Foreign nationals in our jail, 10 to 12,000 deported. When we talk about remigration, it doesn't matter whether you've committed a crime or not. So let's be very clear. Mass deportations is not the same conversation as remigration. So stage 1 is mass deportations, predominantly to do with illegals.
Yeah.
And stage 2 is remigration,
Okay.
which is what Europe is now turning its heads to, because Europe is 5-10 years deeper into the pit of hell. And the British communities that aren't affected yet by Operation Scatter and mass uncontrolled immigration, they will be soon. So that those conversations, as the Overton window shifts more and more to the right, though all those conversations will start happening. So we are talking about remigration now. That's stage 2, different from mass deportations. So that looks at areas that have been colonized and claimed as their own. So what Labour did, I can do this very briefly, Labour did, what successive governments have done, is you flood working class communities with migrants. The natives don't want to be there anymore because the immigrants coming in turn the areas into shitholes. So the natives don't want to be there anymore. So there's not just my opinion, but what I fact found through investigative work, but I also know it's true as well. They move out of the area. The social housing, the benefits, everything goes into that community. When you leave a country, they're not fleeing war, they're fleeing France. They're not coming from Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Gibraltar. They're coming from France. When you're fleeing war, you're going to stick together like they do in the camps at Calais. When you get into those social housing, benefits, NHS, dentists, Tesco's, when you arrive there, jobs, all the security guards that we see around all the different supermarkets, they're always a certain demographic. You get given everything, you're going to form a community. Oh yeah, you're going to appoint a community leader. You know, the thing that the indigenous of Britain, the Christians of Britain haven't done for decades, and now we're fractured and splintered and it's a mess. Well, we're going to sort that out. When you go into that environment, you're going to form communities. You're going to form streets. So everyone knows everyone. And then you've brought your faith with you. You've brought your customs with you. Well, we want a mosque. We want halal stores. We want Sharia. We want our rights. We want everything because we're here now. Now, someone listening to that might say, well, what's the problem with that? Okay, fine. So we have a very different opinion there. Those areas which are colonized and not integrated have become far too problematic to ignore any more. So you mentioned about foreign criminality. No, that's part of it, but you've got to go to source on this, which is identifying those areas that have been colonized by people who refuse to assimilate. And one more point, if I may, that I'll tack on. When I was doing my documentary into discovering no-go zones in Britain, we were very fortunate, and a community leader. I don't think he was an imam, but he was a community leader. He very kindly gave us his time. He invited us into his home. Lots of respect. It's fine. Shoes off at the door. Woman was sent upstairs. She wasn't allowed to be there. Fine. Bottle of water. We sat. I interviewed him. This is all available online. Last question. Integration hasn't really happened, has it, mate? What about assimilation? No assimilation, he said. No assimilation. Why? Now, I knew the answer, and I know my history. It's not possible. Christianity and Islam cannot assimilate. Not in any way. That came from the horse's mouth. Got nothing against the guy. He was a nice guy. It's not disrespectful what I'm saying. That's what he said. Assimilation, no.
I've heard a lot of Muslims say, certainly on podcasts, that they love Christians.
Like myself, I love the sinner and I hate the sin. If I've heard you right, you've heard many Muslims, which is something I've heard as well. they love people, but they hate sin, correct? That is essentially what many different religions teach. Then they'll say, I think if I've heard you right, they'll say how much they love Jesus, how much they respect Jesus. The Islamic standpoint on our Lord and Saviour is the most blasphemous and egregious that he is not God. It is the most egregious. It is the most blasphemous. But they'll say to the cultural Christians, the atheists and the agnostics, but we love Jesus and we do so more than you. Their standpoint is that Jesus is not God. It is as blasphemous and egregious as it gets. And every single person should be outraged. Again, hate the sin, love the sinner. I love people. I don't hate anyone. Communism is the sin. Islamism is the sin. Love the sinner.
Before we get to your third mission, it just come into my head, refugees. We have to make sure genuine refugees fleeing war are taken care of if we're the nearest country. Just for you personally, would you happily welcome refugees or would you begrudgingly welcome refugees?
No, we're closing the borders. No refugees. There would have to be explicitly exceptional circumstances. If liberals, socially conservatives, socialists on the left want to complain about NHS waiting times, you can't get the proverbial can't get a doctor's appointment, trying to get through to the surgery waiting lists, social housing waiting lists. Let's just talk about it from purely a numbers pragmatic perspective. If patriots want their country back, and even the left and the middle ground say Britain's full, too many people, we've been too kind for too long to bring in people hostile to Britain who refuse to assimilate. The borders will be closed indefinitely, and we will end immigration. Will it reopen at some point? Of course, potentially. Why? We've got more than enough people. Let's start encouraging our families to have babies. Let's start encouraging our men to marry women, our women to marry men, form households, form marriages, and have babies. Lots and lots of babies. We don't need to import food. We don't need to recruit. We've got everything we need. We've been too kind for too long. To your separate point, which is an important one, fleeing war. Yeah, so that's not going to be from Sweden. Well, it might be Swedes fleeing Sweden because of the Islamic State takeover, and France as well, in an absolutely dire state. So there's a mindfulness piece there about our boundaries and our national sovereignty and our borders, of course. You mentioned if they're fleeing war, and it's one of our neighbours. Well, America to the west and northern Western Europe to the south and to the east. Obviously, that's always a conversation. No different from in the Crusades when Christians were sent as a result of Arab aggression, Arab imperialism, Muslim supremacy. Always it was in defense of that. Spain's a very good example. And obviously we were successful pretty much everywhere. Jerusalem's another example. So of course we would keep an eye out. Does that make sense? So that's fair. But the borders will be closed, and we will turn our heads to our Gen Z, and I believe they're called Gen Alphas, which are coming through underneath the Zs. And we will reclaim and take back our country and incentivize people to have families, start families.
So these are the details in your manifesto that some people are going to find radical.
Yeah, so your fantastic use of the word radical is exactly what we're going for. Radical policies, radical missions, radical manifesto, radical dialogue. You opened up by saying you're very depressed. You'd be nuts to not be out of your tree depressed and anxious at the state of our country. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. We're taking our country back, and the vast majority of people, I think, are going to produce the political will to enable me to do that.
I also think the left-leaning liberals conflate asylum seeking and economical migration. And if we're flooding the country with all and sundry, maths and common sense would tell me that there is going to come a time where people actually need to join us in the UK for their own safety. And I think they're the people that I want to welcome in. They're the people that I am very happy for my taxes to go towards. And if we're letting in people, illegally housing God knows whoever in these hotels, then what happens when somebody really needs entry into the UK? We're going to be too full.
So I think you're talking about the liberal justification to make them sleep well at night upon hearing radical policies. I appreciate is that correct? The liberal the liberal mindset.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's very kind. I am not going to be so kind because we have no time left. We are out of time. It takes decades to, in terms of the situation we're in, it will take decades to right the wrongs. But technically we've been starting for a few years. We knew Labour were going to get a supermajority. President Donald Trump, that was coming. The Overton window has shifted. People are fed up. People have had enough. People want something new. Everything's in place now. So we aren't just getting started, but it's going to take decades. We have no time to pander to liberal apathy, to liberal cowardice, to liberal indifference. It is time to pick a side and to back a horse. Someone who is saying, we will get this job done. We will right the wrongs. We will put culture first. We will restore Christianity into the heart of government, and we will give people back their country, and we will have justice for those betrayed, which is too many to mention right now, by the establishment for so many decades. So you're right. There are all sorts of justifications you can put forward to the liberal or the liberal left-leaning mindset. There are all sorts. How about fairness to the British people? How about fairness to our elderly who need more time and attention, our disabled, our homeless veterans, our homeless in general? What about our social cohesion and the fabric of society? What about all those things? So if they were to say, well, I need to justify it in my head, it doesn't make sense, does it? Because all these people are drowning in the channel. Well, that's not good, is it? That's really not. So we need to stop that. And what about Islamist aggression in Turkey, Azerbaijan against Armenian Christians, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the radicals in Pakistan? What about all the women and children, Yazidi Muslims massacred under Assad? What about all the women and children, be they Christian or Muslim? What about all those people as well? The vast majority we're incorporating, we don't need. They're fighting age and they're here to spread the caliphate. And do you know what percentage we're importing? Do you know what percentage is Islamic? You know, you don't think it's 5-10%, right? And the other percentage is what, atheists? It's coming from the Middle East. It's 70 to 80% Islamic. I think that's being fair as well. So the liberal mindset, because it's a fantastic point, it's going to have to wake up to the realities of what it's going to take our country back. And I think left-leaning or otherwise, we're talking about liberal mindsets, not the far-left mindset.
And will their argument be that under the instruction of Blair, their countries were illegally invaded and this is why they're now coming to the UK?
You've got it absolutely spot on. So let's just debunk all this, because this is what the liberal mindset and the far left will do. Savages that they are, because it's so wrong and so unfair. We, quote, we bombed the Middle East. Did you bomb the Middle East, Liam? In your little submarine? Have you got a little jetpack and you flew over there and you started bombing the Middle East? No. Did I bomb the Middle East? No. Do we like Tony Blair? No. Did we like him then? No. It's madness. We didn't bomb anything, and we didn't vote. The vast majority of social conservatives with half a brain didn't vote for Blair. And also, we go on about political apathy and the 40% that don't vote. So which one is it? It's what you want to say to them. Now, again, these are conversations that you'd have directly with, let's just say, liberal mindset. And it goes something like this. Let's play it back. We bombed them. We displaced them. We've got everything we want. There's more than enough room in Britain. We should welcome them. You can't argue with that level of stupid. You can't argue with that level of psychopath. I'll give you another example. I was out delivering leaflets promoting my event on Saturday, the 25th of January in Southampton. I was out delivering leaflets earlier this week. Mass deportations demo, no illegals in our communities. Nothing controversial if you're socially conservative or of sound mind and body, knowing the state of Britain whatsoever, but spicy to lefties. Yeah, well, we know, because their mindset is warped, it's corrupted. But let's go on to it. Go through the letterbox. Eventually, someone's going to come out, male or female, waving it. It's typically going to be a crusty. It's going to be an old crusty socialist. Comes out and I always like to engage. But I engage for 15 seconds, and then I know what I need to know. Gentleman said, I don't want this. I said, sir, it's about, just to be clear, it's about illegal immigrants. It's not about legal. migrants. It wasn't about remigration. It was about illegal immigrants. So I don't want it. I said, so are you not concerned about illegal immigrants being in Britain? You know, play it back as though he was a 3-year-old. Yeah, no, I don't want anything to do with this at all. I said, fine, so you're for open borders then. Remember the 15 seconds because I've got no time to waste whatsoever with that mindset. So you're for open borders. Yes, absolutely. I don't believe in open borders. So you don't believe in national sovereignty? No, I don't. I don't think we should have any borders, no national sovereignty, communism. 15 seconds. Good luck and God bless, sir. Can't argue with it. You can't reason with that. So we've got the establishment to take on. We've got communism. We've got Islamism. We've got liberalism. We've got godlessness. Why would we pander to anything that's still umming and erring? People want to get behind us, support us, donate and stand for the party and hopefully vote. Great. My hand remains extended to liberals and to left-leaning.
It's no surprise that your policies are so rigid because the pendulum has gone so far left. But there is a far left, isn't there?
Yeah.
So it's of no surprise that someone's now coming along and they've got to go completely the other way to even out the scores.
No mercy, no diplomacy, no surrender. You give a mouse a cookie, it's going to want a glass of milk. I'm sorry, but it's absolutely ridiculous, the situation that we've got ourselves into. When I was at school, there was no problem with race. In the 80s and the 90s, there was no problem. The vast majority of us got on with it. We were British, Christian land, capitalism, let's go make some money, let's have a family. It takes 10 seconds to tell that story. The weaponization of race, the weaponization of victimhood. And that's without coming on to loads of other topics you want to speak about. There is no going back. They wanted the pendulum, to your point, Liam, to swing all the way to the left. Right. Well, not only are we going to take our country back, but we are going to do everyone another solid, and we're going to have incredibly clear water between us and the far right, which are currently being weaponized because of that pendulum swing that you speak about. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
So far, what you've said, I can see why racists would want to subscribe to UKIP. How would you prevent, like, actual racists?
Sure.
How would you prevent actual racists infiltrating UKIP?
So every mainstream political party, as I'm sure you and your viewers will know, has a vetting process for standing for the party. So if you're talking, I'll answer both of them. But if you're talking about joining the party, you're allowed to join a political party. You can't really vet that. Now we do vet that, but we do it as best as we can. I think you're talking about people who stand for the party, so stand for election. That vetting process is as rigorous as it is, or should be, should I say, with all the other political parties as well. So we ask questions to weed out any signs of racism. I presume you're talking about far-right activity. We weed all that out and then we reject them. So it's very simple. Once that comes out, if that's there, we would reject it. Now, to this date, that hasn't been an issue or a problem at all, because I don't think the far right are very interested in UKIP, missions, manifesto.
I tell you what I'm really trying to do. I'm trying to, without putting words in your mouth, asking you whether you denounce racists or not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's to me, it's a moot point. Again, it was no problem growing up. In my school years, in my teens, uni 20s, corporate world, we should all denounce racism.
That's basically what I wanted to know.
But let's delve deeper now. I know what you're talking about. How about we denounce racism towards whites?
Absolutely.
How about we denounce the I hate white men campaign? How about we denounce the mythical white supremacy and white misogyny, which has somehow bizarrely, but only been able to interfere with the minds of the liberals, the notion of white guilt, which is documented. And again, it's that polluted mindset. Again, the weaponization of race runs both ways. We've seen it throughout our schools, our universities, our colleges, and we see it with race baiters who get platformed on mainstream media. We see it all the time. It's a direct attack on those with white skin, and they've been so justified and normalized and legitimized that they do it open air. The race baiters and the race haters, or whatever you want to call them, the racists, let's go back to your earlier point, the racists.
Well, that's the thing. I've seen that time and time again, particularly on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's a lot of people race baiting. They want that divide. They want the racial tension. And then when somebody makes an observation and says, hang about, you're race baiting here, the race baiter comes back immediately with, you're a racist.
Yeah.
How can you beat that mindset?
You can't. This is what I was saying earlier on, and I know that you've probably got questions where I will be able to double down on my point. You can't reason with psychopaths. You go back to the guy, 15 seconds, remember? Like, that's it. Good luck and God bless, say a prayer. That's it. So I'm concerned with patriotism. I'm concerned with love of the country. I'm concerned with our faith. It's a Christian land. So it kind of depends what question you're asking me. Do I denounce racism? Of course I denounce racism. But I denounce racism against whites as well.
Would you allow a Muslim to join your party?
Are they here to spread the caliphate?
If they're not?
Are they an Islamist?
If they're not?
Are they law-abiding?
If they are?
Can they speak English?
If they can?
Yes, they can join the party.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, some people may be surprised that you would welcome a Muslim to the party as long as they abided by our values.
Yeah, so...
Or your values.
Lying, deception and taqiyya, that aside, my hand remains extended to the Islamic community who self-profess to be one of the most socially conservative communities. They're not as socially conservative as the Catholic community, but we'll come on to that later. My hand remains extended to the Islamic community, to my Muslim brothers and sisters, and I expect them to be supporting a radically right, socially conservative leader and set of policies. We will be watching.
Well, let's go back to your radical policies. I think we're now at number 3, aren't we?
Most importantly, first one is detention, deportation, remigration. I'm not convinced that the top 3 currently are in order. That might be number 2, but let's move on to the next one before 3. We need to educate our youth. I mean, we can try with the adults, but we need to educate our youth on the dangers and markers of far-left totalitarian propaganda as well, because that's being peddled in our schools all the way down from 3, nursery, whatever you want to call it, etc., all the way up to university. So we need to educate on the dangers and the markers, i.e. what it looks like, of far-left totalitarian propaganda, because that covers left-wing radical feminism. That covers radical trans ideology. All these things stem from or can be associated with, in some way, Marxism or communism. So that's super important. We can't forget about the reforms that need to happen in our education system. I've obviously covered off on detention, deportation, and remigration. We need to call out and educate on the problems of both centrism and godlessness as well. That's another really important thing. So no different from when I was educated at school or university. I was given a very balanced viewpoint and I made an informed decision from there. So you might have lefties and you might have socially conservative people, but they were always able to meet in the middle and shake hands. There was no weaponization or radicalization like we see going on. We move on now to rejecting supranational tyranny. So those are your supranational organizations, whether you call it the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations. A lot of people have a problem with NATO. So that's your supranational tyranny, and that's your globalist agenda. And also we call out the international lobbying that goes alongside that as well. So when we say national sovereign borders, we mean that. So above state level influence and lobbying.
And what is lobbying?
It's basically when you've got an awful lot of money and you get the ear of someone who's got an awful lot of power and you say to him, I got a load of money, you've got a load of power, let's do some business. And then you got your net zero, or let's just rattle them off. So you've got DIE, net zero, climate, where do you sell weapons to? Which fight should you go and start? We know key rule, never start a fight. We finish them, we don't start them, etc. So you get in there, loads of money, loads of power. Let's have a conversation, and then let's push an agenda. And typically those will be played out by supranational organisations with a benevolent appearance, but I have absolutely no time whatsoever for their communist nonsense, which is most of them. The missions, when you read them, I did it in a certain way. There's a flow. So we've got urgent burning stuff, but they're missions. So it's not a one-hit wonder. And then we arrive, there it is, corporatism. So that's your ESG. So that's your economic and social governance. So that's your, when we say about our institutions have been captured, we mean our civil service. We mean our fashion houses on Regent Street. We mean our banks. The trans flag everywhere. The woke DIE agenda. A former client of mine, very successful. I won't say anything other than just the sector he works in. Friends, client, 10 years, know him well. One day he turns around to me and he says, white supremacy is actually a thing, Nick, and we deserve to pay reparations. I just 10 years gone down, just gone. No context, no reason, no thought, just, again, ESG, that took care of the corporations.
And what is ESG?
Economic social governance. Again, it's just nonsense policies which say you, to business owners, big business owners, you have to do this, this and this in terms of your training. I mean, ask anyone, put a poll out online, say, do you work for a big corporate, a big business? Yes. Have you had to go through DIE training? Yes, I have. What did you think? It's absolute rubbish. It's absolute nonsense. So it's not just our kids that are being brainwashed, but we told the millennials to leave home early, spend loads of money going traveling, get a job, commute 2 hours to that job, get paid, not anywhere near what you should be paid for what you're being paid, sit in a cage all day, travel 2 hours back home to your wife. You two haven't seen each other all day. You're exhausted, you're tired, but you get your 4 holidays a year and that's when you get to have time together, which isn't quality time at all. And it's also incredibly expensive. And by the way, the great thing about holidays is once you've had them, they're done. You come back to work on a Monday, oh, I need another holiday. The model doesn't work. We need to stay closer to our communities. We need to reject American corporatism, even if that means taking a salary hit, because you're probably paying that on your commute anyway. So ESG captured all of those corporations and entities. When I left corporate, which was in 2011, it hadn't started yet. I'll give you another example. Military Academy Sandhurst as well. I speak to all my friends who went through Sandhurst and who passed out. They said, you wouldn't believe what we've seen. Let's take police, justice. Pick an area. I can't not think of areas that have been captured either by diversity, inclusion, equality. It's a reason why the acronym is DIE, and ESG, economic social governance. These are ways to push supranational, linked to communist style agendas.
Would you change the police force? For example, people getting their doors kicked off first thing in the morning for Facebook posts, and versus somebody getting their house burgled and getting given a crime reference number when they call the police. Like, police's priorities. And I'm by no means homophobic, but for me personally, although I should be asking the questions, I just want to put it out there that I don't want to see our police officers dancing and prancing around at a gay pride event. Not only does it give off a sign of weakness because they're not there to take part, they're there to patrol and police. You're putting everybody at risk. So for me personally, I want to see the police and go after real criminals and use a bit of common sense. That's a Facebook post. Okay, some people are going to find that offensive, it's going to hurt their feelings. So what? They're your feelings, not the rest of the world's, and you need to deal with that. And really crack down on some of the things that have been swept under the carpet for years. It's like, what have the police become?
Agreed on all counts, and I can answer very quickly. It's a quick point because it's a boring statement. We need to return back to common sense policing. That we've heard it all before. So scrap all DIE training
within the police force.
Yeah, I laboured a minute ago on the point about the millennials brought up. Again, I'll go back to link it. Grow up, leave home, be as far away from your family as you can, waste money at university, don't get a trade, instead be a corporate lemming, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, you never spend time with your wife, you're involved in corporate life, which is typically heavy drinking and socialising and wandering eyes and temptation and all, etc. Come home, have nothing to do with your community, nothing to do with your neighbours. Right, we were sold a lie. We need to understand where that lie has come from. We need to understand what proponents are propping up these ideas. So if you look at the police force, why aren't we in a common sense state? Why aren't we bobbies on the beat? Why aren't we patrolling? Why? Your point is, how have we gotten into this state? There's a very good reason why we've got into this state. It's agendas, it's ideas, it's liberal mindsets, it's lies, it's deceit. Therefore, we need to go back to common sense policing with local bobbies on the beat in their community, roughly in wards. You live in a ward, I live in a ward. There's roughly on average about 3,500 to 4,000 homes in a ward. How many of those homes know who their local police constable is? We should know who our PCs are. We should know where we can go to report crime. It's not come in and have a cup of tea every Thursday territory, but I want to look out my window and I want to see bobbies on the beat. You don't see it anymore, but you will see people getting arrested for hate crimes, for non-crime hate crimes. You'll see people getting arrested for Facebook posts, for social media posts. So let's be very clear. When you talk about policing, that's not the same as justice. That's not the same as the judiciary. But of course, policing is part of justice. So common sense stuff. So when you go to arrest someone for a Facebook post, where's that order, to your point, coming from? So you say, do we need to change things structurally? No, every reframing or reforming of structure will end up with the same result as long as you've got the ideology that is toxic, fueling their motives, their agenda, their behaviour. Not all coppers are like that. But it has, when we say it's infected this far left Marxist nonsense, when we say it's infected our institutions, we mean our institutions. We mean all of it.
Yeah, has the police force become politicised?
Yeah. So you can call it radicalisation, you can call it weaponisation, you can call it politicisation. Either way, I mean, look, it's our job to wake people up to the realities of what's going on. Once you understand something, then you can move forward, can't you? You can do something about it. I think that we're at a state now in 2025 where the vast majority of people do understand what's going on. They do understand what's going on. Crime is rife. Drug dealing and drug culture is rife. Lawlessness is rife. Disrespect is rife. Degeneracy is rife. All of it's rife. Okay, fine. Well, mass deportation sorts out an awful lot of these things straight away, but some common sense policing. So at the moment, the police have all the authority to make the arrests which you've mentioned, which you and I would argue is Mickey Mouse territory. So it's common sense judgment, be on your way. The powers are removed from the police to do what you're talking about, and they were given solely to the CPS. So every crime has to be recorded. Every non-crime, everything about crime or criminality and the interpretation of criminality has to be recorded, and then the CPS wade through one at a time everything that comes across their desk. That is where we're at if you want to talk about structure. Where we need to be is that police have far more power to deal with what you're talking about, which is the nonsense. Then the left will say, but that's what we had in the 70s, racists infiltrating the police. So we're not looking to shift the pendulum back and forth over the decades. Let's do something better for our children and our children's children. Let's just go back to common sense. So I don't have an issue with the phrase common sense being associated with middle ground thinking. So let's give the police back power to say, that's clearly nonsense. No one's been hurt. That's their opinion. It's called freedom of speech. True, but let's get rid of the toxicity. That's why I laboured on my point about ESG and about DIE. These agendas, these brainwashing agendas mean that you, as a public servant, we're talking very much now about public sector, ESG is private sector, both public and private have been grabbed hold of by the short and curlies with these nonsense Marxist agendas around tolerance, inclusivity, fairness. We call it woke, but it can be broken down. All this material is online, by the way. We're brainwashing both private citizens and public sector workers to a far left agenda. Let's rip the toxicity out, bury it, and never have it in the public domain again.
Yeah, when you see the stats on crime across the board skyrocket from robbery to theft to and you've got police thin on the ground and they're investing their time in non-crime crimes.
Non-crime crimes.
And essentially thoughts, retweets, Facebook posts.
Hate speech.
It's not only is it an insult, but it just puts us further in the black hole of how we're going to get out of this mess. And it also, most importantly, it puts the country in danger. It puts more people in more vulnerable positions. The proper stuff's being neglected because everyone wants to be so politically correct.
Yeah, that's right. The danger level is at 100. When the public can be at no greater risk than when they fear or mistrust the police. I'm pretty sure that's in the police code of conduct somewhere. Obviously, as human beings, we have what's called the social contract, which is based on the 10 Commandments, right? I won't kill you, you won't kill me, I won't steal from you. It's the social contract, right? Mm-hmm. The police have something very similar. So let's park ambulance, fire, and I'm sure we're going to go on to talk about the church. Let's talk about the police. If the public don't trust the police, we are all in very, very grave danger. Because I would argue that policing, as a social conservative, I would say this, but law and order, democracy, and freedom of speech are kind of, again, I'm not mentioning Christianity for a second, they're kind of fundamental pillars of our society, are they not? If you ask anyone, why do you love Britain? Why do you love the land? Why are you a patriot? It should always come back to that. Well, because my country growing up was amazing and safe, and I was given every opportunity, and I'm the luckiest person alive, and I want to preserve that. That's because of democracy, law and order, and freedom of speech. Now, there are other things as well. Again, I'm parking faith for a second. There are other things as well. When the police aren't doing their job, i.e. when they are being unjust, I'd say a core British value is tolerance, kindness, and fairness. We love a bit of fairness. Something about kindness and fairness that goes a really long way. When you know where you stand in Britain, I'm sure that's a universally accepted trait that is to be enjoyed when we receive it. When the police aren't doing their job and the public mistrusts the police, we are all in very grave danger. That's without talking about the next point, which we must, which is two-tier judiciary.
Okay, you've just got there before me. Let's talk about two tiers across the board.
Right. So anyone who's on the right, centre right, whatever term you want, centre right, right, far right, the public eye, the public gaze, socially conservative people, the public gaze is on you. You put a foot out of line, you're lucky to even be alive. You put a foot out of line and your door's coming off of its hinges because of a Facebook post or because of a tweet or because of something you said, for example. You're getting slapped as hard as you possibly can. Okay. Meanwhile, the migrant who orally raped to death the woman on the park bench got given 10 years. The examples that you and I both have of two-tier justice not only sicken the British public and not only make us very sad, but they also deeply depress us, don't they? Because again, let's go back to that central tenet as well.
When it's two-tier, there's no justice.
It's not fair. We love a bit of fairness. We love a bit of kindness. We like to know where we stand. We may not like it, but it's fair. I'd say it's a huge part of being British. What do you love to be British? How would you describe your culture? What part of your culture is under attack, etc. So not only have you got a massive trust issue with the police and with policing, but you've also got endless reams of migrant terrorism coming away pretty much unscathed for the crime. Endless reams of Islamist terror and Islamist activity coming away unscathed. Endless reams of anything just off the dome, Just Stop Oil, far left communism, Marxism-based organisations, Socialist Worker Party, Antifa, Unite Against Fascism, all far left organisations, Stand Up Against Racism, all these, Peter, Hugh Edwards, within the Labour camp. All of it is smack on the wrist territory in context of crimes committed. In context. But if it's anything outside of that left-leaning, left-wing, left-liberal, communist, Marxist, far-left space, it's dealt with in a much different manner, with kid gloves. It's mental health. It's not your fault. It's society's fault. We'll place the blame somewhere else. You're actually the victim here. And this is riddled throughout the UK and Europe as well. And for your viewers, I forget the names of the individuals, certainly, but I know it was in Europe. A woman's used pepper spray against a rapist. And there are a couple of other examples where a woman's defended herself and they've gone to prison but the attacker, and this is all documented, it wasn't a purse snatching, which I still think would require pepper spray and potential and your right to self-defend. But this is riddled throughout Europe, where we have it a lot worse, certainly. So we've got a monumentally huge problem with both policing and with two-tier justice. And the cherry on top of the cake, if it could get any worse and more depressing, is the left, the justice system, and our conservative, in name-only leaders, Kemi Badenoch, refuse the claim that there is two-tier justice and policing within society.
Over the years, it's been a right-wing phrase. It's been a right-wing observation that there's two-tier policing, how normal people are policed compared to how minority groups are policed or how people on the left are policed. And the right wing have coined that phrase, rightly so. But what I've noticed is, more recently, that people on the left and other minority groups, they're now using the phrase two-tier as if it's switched around.
Yeah.
And I just think it absolutely hasn't. You've cottoned on. It's
hijacking.
It's hijacking, it's word salad, it's manipulation.
It's weaponisation.
Deflection, all of it.
Deflection, deceit, all of it. It's called the Unholy Alliance for a reason. That is Islamists and communists getting into bed together. Christians do not get into bed with communists. It never has happened and it never will happen. Communists and Islamists stand shoulder to shoulder. You saw after October 7th, you saw 23, you saw what happened on the streets of London, up and down the UK and worldwide. You've got self-professed communists, far-left extremists, standing shoulder to shoulder with Islamists and with Muslims. If we're to distinguish between peaceful, moderate Muslims and Islamists on this, they all go together because they stood shoulder to shoulder with the communists, with the radical trans lobby, with everything that the far left stands for with and agrees with. They all stood together. So it's called the Unholy Alliance for a reason. Deceit, I mentioned earlier, to defame, to destabilise, to demonetise, where possible, destroy. But the main chief tactic of far-left totalitarian propaganda is deceit. I mean, it's weaponisation, but it's too generic. It's to deceive. It's psychological warfare. That's what they do. The right doesn't want to have anything to do with it. It's a socially conservative right. We hate it. We don't want anything to do with it. And they know that. We can defeat it. We can overcome it. But your point about they've now hijacked the two-tier system in terms of their rhetoric, it'll never end. As long as these people breathe, it will never, ever end with the nonsense. And I'll tell you what it does. It serves to deflate conservatives. It serves to deflate, weaken, destroy, break down, make depressed, make anxious the socially conservative demographic in Britain, because it's too much to bear, because it is utterly disgusting and disingenuous and deceitful how these people behave. Now, that there isn't a question at the end of that. What I would say is that, going back to our missions, one of the missions is to wake people up to what far-left totalitarian propaganda looks like. How many patriots do you know, and you will have an enormous amount of experience, who have said, can't really articulate the argument against the left. I don't really understand what they're saying and why they're saying it. Yeah, because you have to know so much about deception and deceit and manipulation and weaponization. I mean, it's not a difficult conclusion to come to, true, but you have to be able to unpack it all. And then what you'll realize once you've done that is that there is no reasoning. There is no arguing with them, so you don't engage. And then you're at full circle. If that helps your viewers or if it helps patriots, when they feel the frustration building up when they're watching it at street level, or even if they're engaged in it themselves.
Hence your 15-second rule.
Hence the 15-second rule, hence why they mask up, hence why they wear black bloc, hence why they are cowards, hence why they have no honour. Because they know they have no honour, they know they're cowards, they know they're gutless, they know they're lily-livered. And we pride ourselves on courage, strength, bravery, justice and righteousness. It's very much good versus evil. Plus, yeah, the 15-second rule. Be a better friend to yourself. 15-second rule. If they're a communist, so if they're a left-leaning liberal or a socialist or a full-blown communist, 15-second rule. Don't have it anywhere near you or your family. Zero tolerance policy. Cut the toxicity out.
the unholy alliance that you mentioned, you spoke of Islamists. Now, I would imagine there'll be people watching and listening that will assume that an Islamist is the same as a Muslim. So can you just define what an Islamist is for anybody that's thinking that you're just talking about Muslims?
Yeah, certainly. Islamism and an Islamist is a member of the Islamic State ideology known as the Caliphate, which is the spread and continued spread to world domination of the religio and politico Sharia law, Caliphate, the Islamic State. It's one of we start and end in the exactly same place, Islamic State. I advise people to go onto the Home Office's website, put in proscribed terrorists, that's proscribed, not prescribed, proscribed terrorist organizations. There are 80. 57 of the 80, 70% are Islamic. So I want to go back to your question, but so we're immaculately clear, 70% of the terrorist organizations proscribed in Britain are Islamic. So someone needs to stick that in their DIE pipe and smoke it. But to your point about the difference between Muslims and Islamism, so Muslims, moderate, peaceful, law-abiding in the context of Britain, British, love their country. These people are our brothers and sisters. They just choose a different faith. The Islamists are here to spread the caliphate. That's the politico and religio spreading of the Islamic states.
Yep.
My hand remains extended. Mine and the party's hand remains extended to all those Muslims, to your point. The Islamists, there will be no mercy, no diplomacy, no surrender. They're being detained and deported and stripped of their citizenship, which leads to remigration, which we've already covered off on.
Yeah, here's the thing. We're talking about being against terrorists or anybody with extreme radical Islamic views. And you'll get someone like James O'Brien, that if somebody was to object to Islamists and the dangers they bring with them and the potential threat, loss of life, etc., if you object to that, him and the likes of will then go straight on the attack where you're Islamophobic, you're anti-Muslim, and then what they're doing is they're then alienating Muslims. They're not separating the two.
Yeah, my hand remains, let me be clear, my hand remains extended to peaceful, moderate Muslims who reject radical Islam, who reject Islamism, and who reject the Caliphate, Sharia law, and Taqiyya. My hand remains extended to those people. 90% of the world's terror attacks have been conducted since 9/11 by Islamic terrorists. Over 44,000 since 9/11 in the name of jihad, in the name of Allah. I've already mentioned that in the prescribed terrorist list in the UK, 70%, 57 of the 80 prescribed terrorist organisations are Islamic. Muslims make up 6% of the population in Britain. They're represented in prison at 18%. There are 45,000 terrorists on MI5's terror watch list. 45,000. 39,000 are Islamic. Enough is enough.
And under UKIP, you would deport all of those immediately.
Yeah, so going back to stage one or missions or deportations, the 39,000 Islamists on MI5's terror watch list wouldn't be on a watch list. They would be detained. The doors would be kicked in. Everything would be raided. They'd come and their accomplices as well.
It makes me think of the attack, literally the attack that Tommy Robinson has come under over the years. And time again, he's differentiated the two. He's drawn a line between radicals and moderates, and his message has been loud and clear that he is objecting to the radical leg of Islam that want to take over the West and destroy our culture compared to those Muslims that have assimilated.
There's a clear difference between the Caliphate and your what we call moderate, peaceful Muslims.
There is a massive difference, and it's a shame to think of what he's sacrificed to keep pushing that message to the point where, and I'll sort of put a question in here as well. Now, recently, Nigel Farage was being interviewed across all of his platforms. So Elon Musk has started endorsing Tommy Robinson's work. He's watched his documentary Silenced, and he's seen with his own eyes the injustice. So Elon Musk has then started backing Tommy Robinson's work. And then all of a sudden, Nigel Farage appears, and he's being interviewed by a number of platforms. GB News, we use that as an example.
Sure.
And he's asked the question, would you accept Tommy Robinson into Reform UK? Now, I know Tommy Robinson personally. I know that Tommy does not want to join any political party whatsoever at the moment, at least. He is all about the cultural movement. It's all about the culture for Tommy. He does his thing, politicians do their thing. So I know that it was never a question asked, for a fact. I visit Tommy twice a month. I'm qualified to discuss this.
Sure.
But Nigel Farage obviously teed up that question.
Yeah.
He obviously put words into the interviewer's mouth, asked me if I'd accept Tommy Robinson into Reform UK so that I can reject him. But then he went on to denounce him, and then he actually went on eventually to slander him. So there's wokeness creeping into Reform. And the thing is, a lot of people look to Reform as if they were going to be the party to save the UK, which is why I'm interested now in hearing what everyone's got to say. So not that Tommy's asking to join UKIP by any stretch, not any political party, but are there restrictions your end? Would you, for example, welcome Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, other cancelled characters?
The hand's been extended to both Tommy and Katie. Of course, they're welcome. They're patriots and they're fighters.
So there's no political snobbery within your party?
No, none whatsoever.
Which I think has been the cancer of politics for too many years.
I think there's so many cancers of, I just call them the establishment. I just call them the establishment. You know, the other day I was doing my X Spaces, which I do every other week, 8 p.m. on a Thursday evening every other week. And someone said, lady said, look, Nick, I'm loving this. I really am. But when you get into power, you're just like all the rest of them. That's called a checkmate statement. Look, I've got no issue with that, those statements at all. The rent is due every day on trust, loyalty and respect. That's my answer to that. Every day, the rent is due on trust, loyalty and respect.
So the patriot movement within the UK is valuable to you?
The reason why it means the absolute world to me is because that patriotic movement, both online and at street level, speaks out. They get out of bed in the morning, they come to protests, they come to rallies, they join political parties, they have their voice heard, they create podcast channels like this. There are so many ways the patriotic movement is fighting back. And the most inspiring and wonderful thing on this earth, outside of femininity and masculinity and family and there's some religious stuff in there as well, is bravery, is courage. It's the most inspiring thing to see it. And so the patriotic movement means the world to me because even before 2019, before I planted my flag, there's good people that have been doing such good work for such a long time. If those people weren't there doing those things, and we know who we're talking about in terms of big names, but if the followers, if the attendees, now I'm just going to leave it, then all you've got left is voting and online media. That's nowhere near powerful enough. We need to showcase at street level, as has been done since the beginning of time, what we're all about.
It's a shame that Reform refer to them as that lot and are very dismissive about the patriot movement because we're not talking about football hooligans. You know, everything, the movements have changed, the country's changed, the supporters have changed. And the patriot movement, I think, is incredibly important because they're the ones that are living on the council estates. They're the ones that are struggling the most and forgotten the most. And yet, for me, and this is lived experience, they're the most kindest and compassionate group of people in society. They're all out for protecting the weak, the vulnerable, the elderly. They come together, they share what they've got. And I just think it's a shame that Richard Tice recently dismissed them as that lot. And people can react in the wrong way if they're put on the spot, knee-jerk reaction. They're trying to protect their reputation and they don't want to be affiliated with Tommy Robinson because the media's made him to be the boogeyman. But a true leader reflects and can put his hands up. And I also think there's no shame in changing your mind if you're presented with new evidence. And what he could have done was he could have come back and said, do you know what? I didn't mean it as that lot,
Sure.
as if you're shit on our shoe.
No, double down.
But you're absolutely right. They all come back and they doubled and they tripled down, and they had multiple interviews where they went in on Tommy and people that support Tommy even more. There was a presenter from GB News who called anybody that listens to Tommy's word a troglodyte. So the political snobbery is not just Parliament, it's sort of seeping into what you would consider a right-wing news channel, spreading.
Well, yeah, no, certainly. Again, you say political snobbery. I think it's a really good phrase. Again, I just used the word establishment or liberal elite establishment class. The Patriot movement isn't just working class people.
Yeah.
I know loads of the proverbial, if you're talking about classes, middle, upper, aristocracy. I know loads of people who are patriotic. But in terms of boots on the ground, the people that want change, going back to my earlier point, the people who want to advocate for change, the people who want to bring change about, they want their voices heard. That's where you get your protests, your demos and your rallies. Now, I completely agree with what you've said. I'll spend 5 seconds, in inverted commas, on Tice, Reform and Nigel. I'm not in the least bit surprised to hear that they've denounced Tommy Robinson. 5 seconds. So now we see the cognitive dissonance and the Stockholm syndrome come forward. You see it in the comments, you see it online. Yeah, but I'm still going to vote Reform. Yeah, but I'm still going to vote Tory. 15 seconds. Not interested.
I also want to mention that I do not want to divide the right either. My ideal scenario, but we know that the world isn't ideal, nor are scenarios, but I really, I'm desperate. I want the right to really, really unite and create a wholesome kingdom of people that really, really are united, and they want change, and they're going to pull together and help each other and not think that everything's a competition and they've got to shit on each other and turn on each other and denounce each other for the sake of what?
You just described UKIP, mate.
How about that? You're converting me.
You've just done it. So this infamous unite the right hasn't happened for decades. There's a reason why it hasn't happened. Now, look, you've got bad faith actors, you've got government agents, government assets. Everyone inside the Nigel camp, everyone inside the UKIP camp knows that the government is called controlled opposition. So for your viewers, those who don't understand what controlled opposition means, it means that the establishment who hold the keys to power, which is made up of a yellow party, a blue party and a red party, they know that they're going to get things wrong. They know that they're going to become old news. They know they're going to make mistakes. So we call it incompetence, but we also know there's an insidious agenda there, specifically in the Labour Party, but they're two sides to the same coin. So we know that the establishment isn't going to hand over power thus. Here you go, here's the keys to a G7 nuclear country. So they control an opposition. Nigel and Reform are the opposition. They brag that they're the opposition, right? It's a selling point. And all I hear is, whenever I hear that is, how did you get there? Why are you there? Who wants you there? Because we talk about espionage and corruption at state level so passionately on the right. Is it possible? Is it possible? Let's ask ourselves that Nigel and Reform are controlled opposition. Explain the Muslim chairman. Explain the removal of Ben Habib and the shift that he did before the general election in terms of management. Explain why Nigel said, I'll stand all of a sudden. Explain all these things. If it walks like a duck, acts like a duck and goes quack, it's a duck. But people will still vote Reform. As long as people are awake and aware of what Reform and Nigel are now all about, and they're viewing that through the lens of controlled opposition, then I've done my job. Everyone's done their job. So if you put that to everyone and everyone goes, half of them go, yeah, I agree, I'm leaving Reform, and the other half go, no, I don't believe that, I'm still voting Reform, that Stockholm syndrome can't be argued with. There's no point. Let them get on with it. So the Reform are called Tory Light, Tory 2.0. Okay, fine, just get on with it. What you just described a minute ago is UKIP. Why can't we unite? Take away the government assets, take away the controlled opposition. Why can't we all just unite as socially conservative people with a socially conservative ideology? Why can't we unite? We can. There's no more excuses anymore.
No. Let me fire some more questions at you then regarding policies and UKIP as a whole. So I've heard you say culture first, economy second.
Yeah, so when we say what your culture actually means, you can say things like, well, British Christianity, democracy, law and order, freedom of speech, go back to the kindness and the fairness, etc. Some people might say pubs and taverns. Some people might say fish and chips. But what do you actually mean by your culture? Well, surely it's your traditions, it's your values, it's your history, it's your ethics, it's your morals, it's your code of conduct, and it's your faith. It goes right the way down to what your behaviour looks like as an individual and your behaviour's impact on societal cohesion. So when we say culture first, economy second, we mean two things. One is that we need a return to traditional family values and to implement and restore Christianity back into the heart of government. And we also need to, item 2, call out what's called the number dump. And that means when you're on Question Time or when you're doing interviews and you're an establishment puppet or a politician, you use numbers to confuse people. It's absolute nonsense.
They certainly confused me.
It's a complete lie. 100 trillion, billion, squillion, 64 million, and we've invested 92 trillion, and it's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. In a G7 nuclear country, there's more than enough money to go around. You've got to, it's not a, running a country isn't an easy P&L. True. Nothing changes from small business to country in terms of it being a P&L. It's what comes in, what goes out. We would be on our way to making Britain great again within a year with me at the helm. I promise you. Stop the leakage, stop the waste, stop the nonsense, get back to common sense, middle ground, common sense thinking. Stop doing silly things with other people's money, and then you might have more of a cohesive society. Our culture must come first. If you don't have your culture, you might be a bit richer, it might earn you a few more quid, but you'll devastate your culture and you will allow barbarism in at the gates. Culture must come first. The economy will always do the right thing if you've got a culture which is solid and sound, beneficial.
So you would manage the country like a businessman as opposed to a politician?
Correct.
Okay. How would you safeguard the vulnerable and the elderly?
One of the policies I'm most passionate about is the protection of our most vulnerable within society. So women, children, disabled, and our elderly. I've had to look into some of the assisted care homes, social care schemes. When we say vulnerable, there was a girl recently called Sarah Sharif. Cases like that, we don't have the time to talk about that. It's too long and problematic and complicated. So let's talk about our elderly in our care homes and assisted living, an area I'm massively passionate about because I genuinely care about our elderly and I'm appalled at the way Starmer's treating them, although not surprised. We are aware of the fact that abuse is rife and neglect within the assisted living community with our elderly. We need to impose from the helm, from Westminster, direct criminal consequences to the directors and the owners of care homes and of assisted living spaces. So there's a red dot on those individuals. You want your political correctness, you want your health and safety tick boxes, you got it. There needs to be direct consequences. There also needs to be incredible fines and sanctions against these companies that start up where neglect or abuse is found. I suggest we have third-party cameras as well. Now, that's controversial, I know, but you have third-party cameras monitored by third-party agencies so that if there is a cover-up of some description, so let's just say the proverbial, an old lady in a wheelchair, we've all seen the footage of these things, an old lady in a wheelchair gets beaten up, it's there on camera, got you banged to rights, etc. We have to safeguard and protect the most vulnerable within society. That's our women, our children, our elderly, and our disabled as well. So there are government policies that we can actually implement. Sometimes it's to do with stamping it out. Other times it's sensible to set a deterrent, a precedent, because you can't stop evil from happening, can you? No one's saying that. I'm not sat here saying I can do that either. But it's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because it's very important to me.
And how would you prioritise our taxes? Where would our money go?
The only thing to say at that point is that we would actually be ending an awful lot of spending. So all of your net zero, all of your DIE, all of your critical race theory, BLM, ESG, all of that funding, which is hundreds of millions, if well, not billions, that would all be stopped. Now, once we've balanced the books, you look at what's going on. Your direction is about how we spend it. Well, that would obviously be on the detention, deportation, and remigration program. So, full transparency, I predict that if you are to cut out the nonsense left-wing madness, I'm to predict that there would be a surplus. So the black hole, the 21 billion black hole, absolute nonsense. I'm presuming there's more than enough money to go around if you cut the nonsense. So then in terms of where it would go, that would be on facilitating and funding detention, deportation and remigration and the associated task forces that would be required to deploy that sort of operation.
You said critical race theory. What is critical race theory?
So CRT involves looking at historical injustices and uneven outcomes in society as being down completely to race and ethnicity, which is about as racist as it gets when you point to ethnicity for your cause, unless, of course, it's true, unless, of course, it is bang on.
Yeah.
So critical race theory suggests that all whites are supremacists and racists.
And is this being taught in schools?
Yeah, so this is critical race theory.
Yeah.
So you've got radical gender theory. I don't know how far you want to wander on this point, but I'll do it quickly. There's an UNESCO global rollout where 3-year-olds and up are taught masturbation, anal sex, the dark side of sexuality between adult male and adult female. That's from 3 and up because it's done in the name of inclusivity, which is the I on the DIE.
And this is within the education system?
This is within the education system. So this is greenlit by the Home Office.
Well, that comes on to another question I wanted to ask you. How would you reframe the education system? What would you change within schools?
So we need to reintroduce, where it isn't happening, there will only be Christian biblical prayers, Christian biblical readings, teachings, worship, acknowledgement, our Lord's Prayer, and that's assembly. And that's it. If you're of another faith, you're allowed to go to a private school of that other faith and you can pay for it yourself. This is a Christian land. We're talking about state schools, not private schools. So we need to see massive reform in education from the ground up. So that needs to be mandatory. Let's just say, for the sake of our conversation, that goes through to 13 or to GCSEs at 16 also. We need to scrap all diversity, inclusion, equality, CRT, BLM, radical, trans, gender in the reforming of our education system, our education institutions. We need to scrap all of those items as well. We need to place a heavy, stern focus on the importance of masculinity and what it brings to the table in society, and the importance of what femininity brings to society and brings to the table as well, and the complementary to different genders as well. Now, these are typically entrenched in biblical teachings, but it's nothing that when we went to school that we had a problem with. Respect for women, respect for the law, respect for fear. So a huge area that I'm really passionate about is, which links to reforming education, but also your question about tax. I want to see young men doing volunteer work both in Britain and abroad. So, for example, why don't we have a mass national rollout? So if I bring up national service, everyone says, oh, absolutely not, even the right. If I say about training them for war, absolutely not. Okay, fine, let's do a halfway house. Let's embrace masculinity and use our education system to breed God-fearing, patriotic, strong, masculine men. Let's make sure that the basics are covered. Let's make sure that home economics is taught in schools. Let's make sure that housekeeping is taught in schools, balancing the books. I'm sure you know plenty of women, wives who do these jobs. It's the toughest job on earth. Matron, nurse, advisor, chef, cleaner, bookkeeper. You got 10 different roles. Any man who finds that is the luckiest man alive. It really is so very special. What's wrong with traditional gender roles? What's wrong if the girl at school wants to learn science or maths? What's wrong with that? It's absolutely fine. So that it's not that the curriculum needs to change all that much, but we need to go back to some basic common sense with regards to what we want from our education system. So we need to remove the rot. And this is kind of, you're seeing a pattern now. Every question, it's the same pattern. Remove the shit, remove the toxic, remove the far left rot. Let kids be kids. Give them a basic foundation in our institutions of fairness, tolerance, kindness, respect, Christian values, traditional family values. And let's also throw in, at whatever age it's appropriate, for young men to actually start thinking about the bigger picture. And I want to link this to something very important, and it links to our conversation earlier on about degeneracy. I will always hold man to account over, you said earlier on about whose fault is it, the Bonnie Blue thing, chicken or egg. Society's rampant with it now. It's not the girl's fault. It's not the supply. It's the demand. I will always hold men to account. You need to lead the charge, and I'm hopefully you're going to talk about the I Hate Men campaign as well. Lead the charge and give women what they want, to be upstanding, to be strong, masculine. It's got nothing to do with how educated a person is or how good they are at sport, for example. They each their own there. But let's get that reinstilled back in our grassroots. I don't think any family, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, would disagree with that sentiment.
There's sort of two things I want to discuss here. Now, I'm well aware, we're having a freestyle chat, so I know that my questions have been a mixture of beliefs, values, and policies. And I suppose your view and opinion on, do you think that men are being purposefully feminised? And also, I do want to hear you talk about the I Hate Men campaign. So roll with them two for a minute.
The I Hate Men campaign is a campaign, an agenda with its origins in the scourge of radical feminism. It is to do with manipulating and weaponizing particularly young women to despise men. So we see the rise of misandry, or the misandrist, which is the opposite of misogyny. Stage one, or item one. Item two is the masculinization of women. So that's all of your women who have now co-opted to live their lifestyles like men do, which typically involves hypertrophy, which is one down from bodybuilding. So muscularity, a frame, a physique of sorts. Another item within that is to be the breadwinner, Miss Corporate, and do all the things that man could do and not worry about child rearing until they're 30 or 35. So if you take all the different items, it's a hatred of men, because they've been taught men are responsible for every single evil. It's a left-wing ideology. And it's also an empowerment on steroids that they can do absolutely everything and then ultimately arrive north of 35 childless. This is incredibly toxic and damaging to society. It's incredibly damaging to the social fabric, and it's incredibly damaging to the girl's mental health. And as ever, same theme, another solid, we will once again step up and try and right that wrong as we see let's just say the flock return to some sort of common sense. The origins were the right to vote. You and I will both be aware of that. In 1979 or 80, Margaret Thatcher said it would become illegal to rape your wife, because that wasn't illegal at that point. So she introduced that rule. Good. Safeguard the most vulnerable within society, women's rights, voting. Okay, fantastic. Where does that line stop? Enter fourth wave radical feminism, which is misandry and the creation of the misandrist. The I Hate Men campaign. Straight question, straight answer. It's everywhere. And then you've got monsters like Sadiq Khan and those people who control large institutions, who have opportunities to brand their message through marketing, leafleting, stickering, flyering. So it's absolutely everywhere. You'll see it on all the trains, and it's right there. If you feel like you are being watched inappropriately or looked at inappropriately by a man, call the police immediately. What do you mean? What do you mean watched inappropriately? What if someone is particularly attractive, for example, or what if someone's wearing something interesting, or in the case, ironically, something incredibly revealing, and a man's thinking, I really don't agree with that, or maybe they're thinking, I really do agree with that, or maybe they're just looking because they've got a pair of eyes. You're being encouraged now to call the police. Now, this is a completely separate topic to me being a champion of protecting the most vulnerable within society, women, children, our elderly and our disabled. That's a completely different topic to addressing the truth behind the I Hate Men campaign and the fact that so many eligible bachelors find it so very difficult to settle down with a female because of the masculinization of women. And that takes many different forms. And the most toxic and most devastating, perhaps of all, bearing in mind my affinity and love and admiration for both masculinity and femininity, is that as a result, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We see the birth of the feminization of men, which no woman wants. But the feminist toxicity will tell them that they want the beta male, they want the simp, they want the cuck. Why? Because he kneels before you, but no woman wants that. They don't. They love masculinity. They adore masculinity and testosterone. It's such a special, beautiful thing. So it's even more toxic after all that descriptive. It's even more toxic because you see the equal reaction, the feminization of men. None of this is leading to large, happy families with lots of babies. The hatred, the anger, the depression, the state of the country, it is all an attack on white British people. It is all an attack on Christianity. It is all an attack on masculinity. It is all an attack on the patriarch. Once you strip it all back and you've heard all the acronyms and words and rhetoric and all that rehearsed, polished stuff, it comes back to that's what it is. It's against us, our faith, our children, our wives, our masculinity, our testosterone, the patriarch, our very way of living. And we've got to save that. We've got to change that. And it can be done.
We're talking about Christianity because you've mentioned Christianity several times, so I can tell you're a staunch Christian, and we're now familiar with the term call to prayer. Would you ever consider implementing a Christian call to prayer?
So if I'm hearing you right, you're referring to the Islamic community have what they call a call to prayer, where they put megaphones on top of their mosques and they make there's a song or a noise. So in Christianity, it's condemned and forbidden to show off and to be prideful in that regard of your faith. So the answer to the question is no. There are many calls to Christian prayer, which in context would be through the Holy Spirit. I mean, Christians pray 24/7. We pray all the time. There is no set time. We pray all day, every day, which again gets no media attention or any other attention. There's a reason why we don't necessarily pray in the street en masse. So devotion and worship and parades would be different, but designated prayer or in the point of call to prayer, it's condemned and forbidden to show off. It's unbiblical. That's there in the teaching. So no is the answer, no call to prayer, because whilst other faiths are designed to dominate and intimidate and bully via death by 1,000 cuts, Christianity will never not be true to its biblical roots and origins.
So does that mean that you'd ban the Islamic call to prayer?
Of course.
How do you think that would be received?
I don't care.
So what are your thoughts on the WEF?
I despise all supranational organisations who subscribe to absolute nonsense communist ideas. So in conservative circles, there's a favour for NATO. There's a conversation about that. But even that now, people are saying just no, because of Ukraine, which is problematic, and don't want to talk about that. Not really, unless of course you want to. Supranational organisations that subscribe to absolute nonsense communist ideology, for your viewers, that's typically referred to as globalism or the globalist agenda. Supranational tyranny and orders above state or national sovereignty is an absolute no. So we would be leaving, we would be exiting, and we would be closing the door behind us with regards to the vast majority of supranational organisations, because they do not have honourable intent on sovereign nations.
And here's more of a belief and an opinion than your policies. So there'll be people that would have listened to this interview, and I've no doubt will find a few things you've said offensive, as everybody does every day, because they think that their feelings are really important. But the importance of free speech as well. In your opinion, what are the consequences of restricting someone's speech?
Devastating. Absolutely devastating. If you want, we can go back to what is it to be British? Why do you love your country? How do you describe your culture? Free speech alongside a few other bits and pieces. Every time, freedom of speech is in there. Freedom of speech creates ideas. Freedom of speech provokes thought. Freedom of speech provokes people into venting or into some sort of exclamation, for example. The opposite being to silence, like you would a child that was being insolent, for example. You will not speak, be quiet. Or as a teacher, as often happened to me, shut up. Silence. That's an order. When you silence free speech in the context that you're talking about, you create hate. You create distrust. You create resentment. That is exactly what dictators and tyrants do. It's 101 in the handbook of fascist dictators. Cancel, silence, smear. And all it does is build resentment, build anger, build rage. It is absolutely toxic, and we've seen it come in under the Conservative government, and we've seen it now accelerated under Labour supermajority with a far left extremist like Keir Starmer at the helm.
My final question, which is double-barreled. What do you still love about the UK? And then segue into how are UKIP going to make Britain great again?
What I still love about the UK is the fact that it's a Christian nation. It's the fact that it's given me a home. It's my home. It gave me one of the most safe, wonderful upbringings with every opportunity anyone could have, ask for. If you're born here, you're one of the lucky ones. So I'd also like to say that I love our landscape as well. I love the shape of Britain. I also love the weather. First time anyone's ever said that. I do. I love the weather. So it's safety, it's landscape, it's weather. It's the fact that it's a Christian land. It's the fact that it's my home. It's the fact that it's our home. And if you are God-fearing, you'll believe that you were put on this earth for a reason, and you also have this land for a reason as well. So, of course, I still love Britain. What I also love is the fact that it's not over yet. What I also love is the fact that we still have hope. And I love the fact that we have this challenge now to reinstill hope in those who have become hopeless. And we have the opportunity to reinstill faith in those who have become faithless. So there's all sorts of things that I love about Britain and that I think are worth fighting for, that I know are worth fighting for. How we're going to make Britain great again is the easiest question out of all of them to answer. Every single person who has said enough is enough, every single person who has said, I want my country back, every single person who is sick of being paralysed by fear, every single person who has been cancelled, silenced, those who are depressed, anxious, given up, every single person who has said those things and who wants their country back is going to have to become a political activist. What does a political activist do? It means that you join a political party. It means that you hand out leaflets. It means that you give up your time and make the sacrifice required to allow for the emergence of a new dawn, of a new leader, of a new time, of a new party. Something radical, something very different. We make Britain great again by every single socially conservative, patriot, common sense minded, of sound mind and body becoming a political activist. What does it mean? It means joining a party. It means voting. It means asking the party, how can I help? What can I do? What skill set can I refer? I want to stand as a candidate. and then in 4 years' time, we will take our country back. But there has to be a sacrifice. You asked, how do we make Britain great again? I tell you, there has to be a sacrifice. Without that sacrifice, I promise you, you won't get your country back. But if you are willing to make the sacrifice, we will make Britain great again.
And is there anything you want to say on a final note without me prompting you to anybody watching or listening?
On December 15th, I was cancelled in Southampton. The far left got hold of the venue. They rang the venue up. They threatened the venue. The venue pretty much broke down in tears when I was on the phone to them. The venue had no choice but to escalate to the police. The police said, due to the threat of violence, you're going to have to shut down the venue. I was cancelled by far left terrorism, and the venue lost X number of thousands of pounds in revenue for that day. We will not be silenced or intimidated by Marxist thugs who, by the way, their ideology has got hold of our institutions. They've captured our institutions and our way of life. So yes, we must stand up to them. And outside of that, make sure you vote UKIP.
Nick, I know you're a busy man, and I know that you move mountains to get here today, and I appreciate that because I really wanted to pick your brain after the bits and pieces that have been popping up that I've seen that have got my attention, and I'm sure this conversation will get people's attention and get people talking. I just hope for a better, safer, more united Britain for the future, and anything you do to contribute towards that harmony, I'll be sitting back watching with a close eye, and I'll be wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, Liam.
Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
We will take our country back.
Let's hope so.
Thank you, mate.